Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today on the day that is the International Women in Engineering Day. So it's lovely that you finished the Lsbu 100 years of women in engineering on this fine day. I'm the Director of Research and Engineering for the School of Engineering, and most people who do research or work in the academic environment realize this has been a ref year. And one of the amazing things that I've noticed writing up our ref document was the contribution of women to our ref document, and the amount of work and networking, the amount of research income that they've brought in, the impact that they've had across the country and globally was phenomenal to me. And to be able to put that into a document and see it, you don't really notice it until you have to put it down and present it to someone else. And I'd like to say congratulations to everybody who's been working on this 100 years. It's been an amazing series of events. I think you should be so proud of yourselves. I think it's the celebration of women is never enough. We should always be celebrated. But what I do like to see is that the events that you formed were both fun. So you had the hackathon, for example, and very, thought-provoking when you had the future and the choose to challenge, when you have to discuss, it's not all flowers in order to get women in the positions where they should be when it comes to working environments. And I think you should be all very proud of yourself. What's very evident from all of these meetings and from the 100 years, and I was thinking today, Ida Bold would be getting her course results at this stage, so she'll be 101 years. And that's incredible when you think how Lsbu played a part in the first women in engineering across the UK. I think that's an incredible achievement. And now we're not talking about the first women in engineering anymore. We're talking about there should be 50-50 women and men in engineering. And we have to question why that isn't the case when the roles are, there's no reason for men and women not to be taking on the same roles. And I think what you have done and what has been thought-provoking is it's not just to get someone into the job. It's not just to get someone into the degree. It's to know what the future holds. So when you have 50% of the population and we are biologically different and we are emotionally different and we are different to the other 50%, in order to gain equality, we need certain ways in which we work in order to be, in my opinion, just there in order to create equality. It's not creating an advantage. It's to say, actually, I need this support in order to do my work effectively. And I need that support because I have X, Y, and Z. And I think when university, when schools, when companies embrace that rather than embarrass you because of it, I think we'll have a game changer. I also think we need to cultivate that idea across businesses, across universities, across schools, that is something that should be given. It's a right, and it shouldn't be that it should be cut out. And therefore, if you require that, that's your prospects pretty much gone down the drain. So I think these conversations and these fun events and these thought-provoking events are pivotal, and we should be shouting from the highest mountains to say, look, this is our right, this is what we deserve. And once you create those environments that are very adaptable to people's needs, because we know with other things outside work, care and responsibilities, everything, especially when we see now with the year and a half that we've had, where we've had families at home, people trying to work, everyone trying to take care of everybody else while they're trying to get a full day's job in as well. It has been very stressful. But what has been noted is productivity hasn't gone down. People being able to work hasn't gone down. And therefore it has even given me, and it should give lots of companies the ability to say, well, actually, people who do caring, people who take care of their families, people who work on other objects outside their job, don't do less. They actually perform more and perform better. And the skills that women bring with them, the skills that we say are soft or whatever, give a connotation that they're not the essential skills. They're actually pivotal to the engineering world that we work in, because it gives you insight into maybe the end user, the developer. Where will this go? What will people do with it? And that curiosity, if you want to call it a soft skill, I don't think it's a soft skill. I think it's an amazing engineering skill that we should embrace and really amplify, that gives us such a core skill. So I'd really like to congratulate you all and welcome you to this discussion today. There are some amazing speakers. Suela is coming after me and she's going to introduce them all. But what I hope we will come out of all of this year-long workshops, this year-long discussion, these discussions that should go on every day for every year forever, is about knowing that we have to work together across the board in order to make sure that girls and women have the opportunity to come into work. And that ability is based on an equal footing in order to make you make work easy for you in order to do it. We're far, far away from that still. And women should never be embarrassed to say, I require X, Y, and Z in order to do my job properly. And what I have found over the last maybe 15 years, that it's become easier to be able to say that. I think a lot of women who went into the, let's say, male-dominated, heavier engineering work in the past probably couldn't have said that. And I think that voice, as becomes wider and becomes louder, is also being driven by men. Men, you know, we will only get changes when everyone agrees to those changes. And we need men and women to both agree to why those changes need to take place. And I think that will drive forward young people going into engineering jobs. They see it as a friendly environment. They see it as an environment in which they can grow. And they see that things that happen outside my life shouldn't be detrimental to that job. And I hope all of that driving forward won't be that it's the skills are the pivotal thing, but we don't lose the skills because other things are not conducive to that working environment for people. So I think these discussions, these embracing of with the importance of women in work, the importance of trying to get young girls and women back into work, getting them to think about engineering has been phenomenal. And the last thing I'd like to end up saying is what I've admired from all of these workshops is the passion I see from all of you, that you want to see young women and girls in those environments, and you want to see them considering engineering. And I think we have a lot more to do when we think about the numbers of girls and young women taking on engineering courses. But it's better than it was. It's more transparent than it was. And if we make it a package that the environment, i.e. the workplace that you go into, the environment, the university you go into, accepts that equality, I think we're on the right path. So I congratulate you all. I wish you a very good afternoon today. I hope that you enjoy everything and you find, I've looked across the board at the amazing speakers that we have today, and I can't wait to hear from all of them. And I'll pass you over to Suela, and I'll let you introduce everyone. So thanks, Dean, for the introduction, and best of luck, everyone, today.
Thank you, Professor Dudley, for those inspirational words. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. I am Dr. Suela Kalici, Associate Professor in Materials Engineering here at Lsbu. I will be the host for this event today. I am truly delighted to be here today celebrating Lsbu 100 and International Women Day in Engineering, which is themed around engineering heroes. Today we'll be hearing about some of the incredible work that women engineers are doing, who do see a problem and solve it, who perform everyday heroics and create and inspire. These are women engineers. Our first speaker today is Ruth Mclaude. She is the archivist at Lsbu. Ruth is responsible for the care of the university historic records. She has helped in researching our institutional history and bringing it to a wider audience. Ruth in particular has done a tremendous amount of work for Lsbu 100 project. She has provided us with historical information about the women who studied engineering since 1920. She has talked us and discovered about the development of specific courses for women in engineering as far as 1920, 1930s. She has taught us or brought us information about the establishment of the Center for Women in Engineering in 1980s. And it doesn't stop there, Ruth has been researching and putting together biographies of some of the most interesting alumni and staff members of LSBU across the century, giving us the most amazing stories and look back into our history. So Ruth, please join me today. Welcoming Ruth, who will be talking about 100 years of teaching women in engineering at LSBU. Ruth.
Thank you, Suela. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the history of teaching women engineering at LSBU, and then I'm going to talk about some of the women themselves who studied and taught at LSBU. It seems kind of fitting that the theme is engineering heroes, because some of them, as I've kind of gone through and found out more about them, I have become convinced that they are heroic. I think they're amazing and really inspiring. So I hope that you all find them inspiring as well. So we will start off very briefly with some institutional history. LSBU was founded in 1892 as the Borough Road Polytechnic. These are a couple of pages from our very first prospectus. If you can read the one on the right-hand side, I know it's quite small. It gives our initial purpose, which says that the object of the classes is to provide sound instruction for young men and women residing in and around South London, thus promoting industrial skill and general knowledge. So that shows that we were very definitely founded looking at educating both men and women, although the subjects and skills that we offered were probably slightly more gendered. Our trade classes tended to end up looking a bit like this, where women's classes were very heavily focused on things like domestic cookery or trade cookery, laundry, dressmaking, whereas the men's classes were the ones where you found engineering and other more kind of typically male trades. So the image on the right-hand side is of the engineering drawing class, and as you can see, that is entirely male. But in 1919, so just after the First World War, we were asked by the Women's Engineering Society if we would start thinking about offering entry to our full-time engineering courses for women, and we said no, which is obviously a little bit embarrassing when you're giving a talk about the history of women studying engineering. But we did happily say that we'd be happy to admit women to our evening classes if they were working in engineering or had worked in engineering. So in 1920, this is the page on the left-hand side, it's our classes for women from our prospectus, and we started saying, why not look at some of the classes in the engineering department? You can look at engineering drawing as an example, and here are some things that might be useful for related to that. And only one person seems to have taken this up at that point, and that was Holt. In 1920-21, that's her highlighted on the middle page, in the middle of that page. I'll talk more about her in a moment or two and go a little bit into her story a little bit more. But on the right-hand side, you can see the figures for the class, that there were 70 people in it, 50 of them passed the class, 20 of them failed, but of that 70, there's only one woman. So that does give you an idea of what some of these women might have been up against as they kind of went through their studies. I'm going to come back to Ida and some of the others in a couple of minutes. 10 years later, we had decided to start offering simplified engineering for women. This was originally offered in conjunction with the Women's Engineering Society, and it was a simplified course that we taught separately. I don't actually know how many women did this. The women who did the exams and the women listed as having done it in our annual reports don't actually marry up in terms of numbers, and I've never been able to quite make that match properly. But after about a year, we did stop segregating the classes. We decided to teach the women in with the men. Women may have done a more sort of restricted syllabus, but they were being taught alongside the men and often outperforming them, which is quite satisfying to see. In 1930, we also started offering electricity in the home, which is essentially basic electrical engineering for women. It meant they'd be able to sort out their own electrics at home, but also they'd be able to get a job in maybe demonstrating electrical appliances, which is the kind of job that you may think of, surely people didn't do that. But in the 1930s, that was actually a big employment thing because this was still very new for a lot of people. So we were trying to get women into new trades and to give something a little bit different. And at this point, we had been kind of increasing our practical skills courses for women outside the traditional. We were also offering a course in something that we called household jobbing, which is essentially like DIY. So we're trying to kind of upskill women outside of the traditional household skills. But we wanted to find out some more information about the women who'd actually studied with us. You know, we can find out as much as we like about the courses, but it all starts to come to life when you find out who some of these people actually were. And the only way that we could do that was by going through all of our exam registers. And our early student records haven't survived, so going through all of these registers was the best way we had of identifying some of the women. And this graph shows the trends in studying for the first kind of 50 years. It is quite a rough graph and kind of indicative. Some of the subject classifications that I made are a little bit vague. People who are studying television, for example, I've put down as electrical engineering because I wanted to try and make something easy to look at. But you can see the kind of trends over the years. There's a very popular point in 1939-40 where we had a whole class of women who were looking at engineering drawing. Engineering drawing then kind of faded out as a subject on its own, and people still took it, but only as part of other courses. So that's why it dropped so dramatically. But you can see that the numbers are never very high. We start to increase looking at our different subjects by the time we get to the 1960s, but the engineering subjects are never really, really high. And there are some years where there are no women at all. If you've been to any of our earlier events where you've heard me talking about this, you'll know that I started calling these the Brian years, because when we were looking for women, we'd come across courses where there'd be 2 or 3 men called Brian and no women at all, which was slightly dispiriting, but it did mean that we started to kind of notice patterns and find different things. But once we'd been through all of the registers, we wanted to try and find out who some of these women were, what happened to them, could we find anything else out about their careers? And we went through our prospectuses to see what we could find about our courses and if we could find anything about who our staff were and who was teaching with us and when. And so I ended up with a massive big spreadsheet of all the women who'd studied with us, all the women who'd taught with us as far as we could identify. We made a short list of the ones who'd maybe done more than one course, who'd done several years with us. And then we decided to pick a representative one for each decade of the last centenary. So here are some of those women. You may notice that there are 7 photos, not 10, and that's because we couldn't get photographs of everybody. We have a mixture of former students, of former staff, of some people who are both. And I'm going to talk more about the first 5 of our women. This is the full list of who they all are, because the second 5 are mostly in their own words, and I would encourage you to go and read those on our website. We'll pop a link in the chat if it hasn't gone there already, because I don't really want to speak for them. I think we did Q&As with a lot of them, and I think they're fascinating and definitely worthy of you going and having a look yourselves rather than me telling their stories for them, particularly as I'm aware that at least 2 of them are either on the panel or in the audience right now, and I definitely don't want to speak for them when they can hear exactly what I'm saying, and it's much easier if you go and read it yourselves. So we'll start with Ida as our first woman. She's from Southwark originally. Her family had moved down from Derbyshire, and she's the youngest of 6 children. Her father was an engineer. In 1901, her older brother was also an engineer, certainly as an engineering apprentice, and she did our course in 1920 to 1921. So as mentioned, she'd have been getting her results about now. We don't actually know exactly what happened to her when she finished her course. We were able to find out that she ended up working at the Royal Army Clothing Depot in Pimlico. By the late 1930s, she was working as a stockkeeper in a clothing department, probably in the same one, and living with Alice Goodfellow somewhere in Wandsworth. They were still living together in 1957, and then later they moved to Worthing, and they actually both died in the same year in 1975. But this is a bit of a demonstration of you can find out so much about somebody. You know, we've got a hint of where she lived and who she lived with. We know where she worked because she was involved in writing a petition, which we found in the archives in Westminster. But we don't actually know whether she was able to go on and work in engineering, because that hasn't been recorded for whatever reason. But for the 1930s, we've actually got a president of the Women's Engineering Society, and Madeline Nobbs started studying with us in the late 1930s, in 1938, and actually wrote up her whole career history for the Women Engineer, which is the Journal of the Women's Engineering Society. And so we know exactly what happened after she finished her studies, which is great. When she originally left school, she started working as a shorthand typist, which apparently she described as disastrous, which is a little bit worrying. But then she was thinking about all the subjects that she'd done well in at school. She read a book about technical drawing. And so she spoke to her father, who was also an engineer, and said, "This is what I want to do." Eventually, he was persuaded. He met another woman engineer somewhere and believed her that it was a suitable job for her. She got a job as a junior in a different engineering office, and that gave her day release to come and study with us. Eventually, she finished her studies. She won class prizes throughout her time here. She was one of the women who did very, very well, and then went on to be involved in designing all kinds of things, from air raid shelters to factories to boat ventilations. She was able to go to dockyards and look at different things. And she moved around a couple of different firms to get a range of experience, and then went to her father's firm, initially as an engineer, then as a junior partner, and eventually as an engineer consultant. By the time we get to the 1940s, we have Audrey Patel. She joined us in 1948. Unusually, she was actually married before she came to study with us. Mostly the women who studied with us were single and married later, but she actually studied with us while working. She was another member of the Women's Engineering Society, so their journal was incredibly helpful in trying to find out more about her career. She was a lab assistant at ICI and did an 18-month workshop training program with them, where she was studying alongside with us. A lot of the time she was studying with us, she was often the only woman studying in the whole department. Of the 6 women who were doing engineering subjects in 1952 and 1953, she was the only one who was looking at mechanical engineering. The other 5 were all studying electrical engineering, which is quite interesting. The only time she wasn't the sole woman in her class was in her first year, and she was actually only the 2nd woman who got her national certificate in mechanical engineering at the Polytechnic. The next wasn't for a good couple of years afterwards. So you can see there really weren't that many women doing these things at that point. You can find out a little bit more about her career from the Woman Engineer Journal. She had a daughter in 1954, and I know that she later had more children, and it seems that she probably actually stopped working after she had children, which actually highlights some of the difficulties that women faced in their careers, not just in engineering, but it would be exacerbated there as well, because obviously society expectations in the 1950s were that women were going to be staying home with their children and that childcare wasn't always available. So although she was doing really, really well in her courses, she'd done very, very well, she ended up probably having to make a choice between childcare and working. So the next one we've got a really full career history for is Vera Brew, because again, she wrote it up in the Woman Engineer. If you're interested in the history of women in engineering, I do recommend finding it. I'll pop the link in the chat at the end. She was another one who did evening classes with us while working through her courses in mechanical engineering. She initially worked for London County Council in heating and ventilating. Then she became a draftsman in the Ministry of Public Building and Works. And that involved her working on huge project buildings, including sort of £5 million worth of air conditioning in the Persian Gulf, which is obviously a lot of money now, but is even more money when you think that she was working on that in the 1960s. She actually reached professional engineer status, but decided she liked the technical side. So by the time she wrote up her career in 1970, she was the main grade engineer for the Northwest Metropolitan Hospital Board, which is Northwest London. So the last one I'm going to talk about in any depth is Carol Maddox. So we found Carol Maddox initially as one of our students in the 1950s, somebody who won prizes throughout her time with us, was consistently kind of top of the class, and started with us in 1958 and was there for several years doing really, really well. But the reason she's included in this list is because she was also our first female lecturer in mechanical engineering. So she started work in 1963 with us and stayed for several years. A lot of the time she was the only woman working in the department. And then she decided to move on, and we don't actually know what happened to her after that. I haven't been able to trace anything of her career, because minutes that told us when we hired her noted that she had left and when we were hiring for her replacement, but they don't go into any detail about where she's gone. So we know that she was married, but we also know that she was teaching and studying under her own name, not her husband's. So we haven't been able to kind of trace anything about what happened to her afterwards. So if anybody comes across any of that, please do let me know, because I'd love to know. And moving on to the people who were gracious enough to give me quite their time to write up their profiles. The first few all came from archive research, but the next few were all people that we knew were in the archives somewhere or other, but also I was able to get in touch with. So I have to say, I am tremendously grateful to all of them for the time that they gave me to write up the profiles, and for not minding me when I sort of chased them all up and sort of pestered them for more information. So Agnes Kaposi was the first female head of an electrical engineering department in the UK. She's also going to be the next speaker. I know the Dean's pre-recorded a section with her. I have to say, I had an absolutely fascinating conversation with her a few weeks ago, which is the basis for the profile, and she was genuinely inspirational and a bit of a hero, to the extent that she's actually mentioned in several of the other profiles. So she's really fitting for today's theme of engineering heroes. But I won't go over her career because she will be talking about that herself. Our next one, who was one of the founders of the Women in Engineering Centre at Lsbu in the 1980s, is Professor Bridget Shield. She's on our panel, so I'm definitely not going to talk about her career because she's right here, but I do recommend reading her profile. Next, for the 1990s, we have Savannah Copay. She gained her PhD from us in the early 1990s and had been with us for a couple of years before that as well, both teaching and studying. She now runs a software company in Cardiff, and again I recommend having a read of her profile because it is really interesting, just the twists and turns that people's careers have taken. Claire, for the 2000s, Claire is the reason we are all here, as it is Claire who initially suggested that we recognise this centenary and got us up and running. So Claire is also being incredibly dedicated and tuning in from New Zealand right now. So it's very early in the morning, and I'm not going to go over her profile in depth. I'm going to suggest that you go and have a look at it and perhaps give her a quick mental round of applause for being dedicated enough to be up very early to come to this event today. And finally, our most recent profile was Zoe de Grussa. She only passed her PhD very recently, so that's great. If you go and read her profile, you can note that by the time she finished the course, she'd said it had moved to being 50-50 in the first year, which I think is very encouraging. And she also points throughout her profile to the kind of range of skills that people need, and also how helpful it is to have mentors. That's something which I think can be seen throughout all of these profiles. There are certain themes which come out, and that is one of them. More than one person that I've had the chance to speak to about their time at Lsbu in engineering, not just people who've been profiled, but people who've been in and around the department at different points, have mentioned Agnes Kaposi as an inspiration. And searching through the journal of the Women's Engineering Society has shown that a lot of women were meeting together. They were really getting the advantage of speaking to one another, of having mentors in the department, and just seeing how helpful and how inspirational that has been for many of them. So those are the links for where you can find the profiles. I will pop that link directly into the chat as well. You can find out a little bit more about some of them on our archives Twitter feed as well. I'm going to be putting some more information about some of the women who didn't make a profile. You know, there were so many women that we could have spoken about, and we had to cut it down for time and for size. But do have a look at all of those, and yeah, have a look. And if you've got any questions, then please do feel free to ask me when we get to the panel. Other than that, I will stop talking and allow you to move on to the next section. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth, for presenting some of the most amazing profiles of Team Lsbu throughout the century, providing us with this incredible stories and insight in our history. More to come later of some more amazing women. Now let's move on to the next profile. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Agnes Kaposi. It is a pre-recorded presentation, and Dr. Agnes Kaposi is a Hungarian-born British engineer. She is the third woman elected as Fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering. She is trained as an electronic engineer, and she worked in telecommunication and computer industries. She is the author of several books, among them System for All and System Models and Measures. She is an educational innovator. In the years 1975 to 1986, she built up the country's largest engineering department at South Bank Polytechnic. Now it is South Bank University. She worked as a consultant to Siemens, BT, and to governmental, academic, and industrial organizations in several countries. As a Churchill Fellow, she studied the experience of women engineers in the West and beyond the Iron Curtain. Dr. Caposi was born a year before Hitler came to power and started school at the outbreak of WW2. Many of her family and friends were murdered in Holocaust. However, she did work as a child labor in campus of Austria, and then after the war, she struggled through a decade of hardship in Stalinist Hungary. In 1956, the Hungarian Revolution offered the opportunity to escape, and she then entered Britain as a graduate engineer, where she started a career and built a future as a researcher, educator, and consultant. She published her memoir called Yellow Star, Red Star in early 20s, and now presents to a wide array of audiences, speaking out against hatred, racism, and intolerance, wherever is found. Dr. Agnes Camposi with Reflection of a Leading Engineer.
I'm Agnes Kaposi. I worked at South Bank from 1977 to 1987. These were remarkable and eventful years for me. I was born in Hungary, a tiny little country right in the middle of Europe. This is the way the map looked between the wars. And then during the wars and after the wars, and even nowadays, the borders keep changing. It's a turbulent region of Europe. The country has the population just about the size of the population of London. It was in the shadow of Nazi tyranny almost from the moment I was born. I was born 3 months before Hitler came to power, and Hungary became almost immediately a willing and enthusiastic ally to Nazi Germany. It then continued like this throughout the war, and they were difficult times for my family. Half my family was murdered. And then the region and the people in my own family were liberated at the end of the war by the Soviet army, which was a completely different experience from being liberated by the British or the American armies, as you sometimes hear. Anyhow, there we were under a communist influence thereafter, and Hungary, being the little country in the shadow of the Soviet Union, echoed this. That meant that I practically lived through my childhood under a Nazi tyranny, and my youth and my undergraduate years under a communist tyranny. I became an engineer almost by chance. It was not my choice. I would have liked to study physics, but in a communist regime, the individual amounts to nothing. Nobody has any opportunity to make a decision. You do as you are told. And I was told to be an engineer, and I must say I am grateful to the communist regime. It's a splendid profession. I enjoyed every minute of being an engineer. The next slide shows my wonderful university. It's on the bank. This is the main building. It's on the bank of the river Danube. Budapest is one of the most beautiful cities of Europe. The joys of the landscape and the townscape were completely lost to us. We were under the university regime, which was just as dictatorial as every aspect of Hungarian society. So the first chance I had to escape from my native country came a few months after my graduation in 1956. If you show the next slide, this is where my life began. I arrived in Britain with a labor permit, not a refugee. At first, I worked in Cambridge, in industry. I worked in industrial research, in the telephone and computer industries. And these pictures give you sort of a short journey around my life in Britain. My daughter was born a year and a half after we arrived, and there is me feeding her, my first child out of two. I had my PhD while working full-time. On the top right-hand corner is a picture of me being the boss. I don't look like it. I was a woman engineer. A woman engineer is always in the shadow of men. That splendid looking gentleman was in fact my draftsman. This is still in industrial research. My work involved, as the bottom left-hand corner shows an example of, developing big systems under computer control. Then I turned to academic life after 8 years in industry. And in course of my career, I wrote several books, and I don't know how many, articles in academic journals. And here are some of the pictures, some of the books which I wrote in course of my career. I only ever wrote one book, which was not of a technical nature, and is shown on the next slide. There it is, Yellow Star, Red Star. It was published in 2020, which is a story of my life, underscored by a historian. So every chapter has a narrative part which I wrote, and a historian adds to it the historical background of what it was like to live through two tyrannies, as I have already told you. Now, you can take the slide off, please, and I can now describe for you briefly my experience at South Bank. So there I was. I arrived after several years in industry, about a decade of industrial experience. There I was arriving at South Bank, which was at that time Polytechnic. I can't say that I was particularly welcomed by my colleagues. The Department of Electrical Engineering had been before quite an important institution, providing power engineers who then went on to do work in electrification of some of the countries of the Commonwealth, and they worked for the Electricity Board and such like. But gradually, demand for power engineers reduced, and when I was appointed, fairly freshly from the computer industry, the number of academic staff almost equaled the number of students of the department. My task was to modernize this department and turn this into something which teaches students and prepares them for work in the modernized electronics and computer industries. My staff were older than I in general. Several members of staff had applied for the headship, and instead the job was given to me. So as I say, I wasn't exactly welcomed. And when I put forward the ideas of how we might move the department forward in a new direction, The question was from the floor, and what are you going to do with our equipment in the power and high voltage laboratories? And I said, well, I suppose that some of the large bulky equipment will have to go. We might donate it to other institutions. And a voice came from the background, vandal. I said, but the work we shall do is to teach people about computers. And came the voice from my staff, well, you are given to give way to fashion. Computers are here today, gone tomorrow. Well, it wasn't quite like that. Computers stayed with us a bit longer. There was no funding to buy new equipment. And all I had was one new member of staff I could appoint. It was a very young and inexperienced but brilliant computer scientist who is now professor at Imperial College. New equipment we somehow had to find money. I had to find money for. I approached the Chamber of Commerce. They wanted to have computer-oriented education for members of their staff to do the payroll or housekeeping, storekeeping. With the aid of my new single computer staff, we devised a program for offering short courses for local industry and commerce. And out of the money which they paid for course fees, we bought some computers, we installed them in our laboratories. That was the first time computers were introduced. As far as I'm concerned, I believe this is the case. That was the first time that anybody did any computer-oriented teaching at South Bank. There was a great threat a year or two after I arrived, which arose from the Engineering Council instituting accreditation, system of accreditation of engineering departments throughout the country. This was new. It was explained to us that accreditation was so important that if a department's course is not accredited, that course is to close. And soon after that, it was expected that the department itself will wither away. At South Bank, we had 4 courses, part-time and full-time degree course. And there was also a part-time and full-time higher technicians course. These were the 4 courses of the department. The accreditation system, as we were told, was only valid for full-time courses. That meant that our part-time course was not to be even submitted for accreditation. That was the first time my department staff and I joined together in some activity. They were as keen as I was to make sure that our part-time students had a chance of being on an accredited course. We composed and wrote to the IEE, the Institution of Electrical Engineers, a defiant letter. We said we are very keen to submit our degree courses for accreditation, but only if both the full-time and the part-time course is to be considered. The response was reluctant but agreeable. Ours turned out to be the first and for a long time the only part-time degree that was accredited in the country. And that started the influx of students. Student numbers increased. Students came first to the part-time course from all parts of the country, because it was the only accredited engineering course at that time. The department's name began to be better known. Our program of modernizing the curriculum created a good response. So gradually, student numbers increased. Equipment was slowly coming forth from the Greater London Council, who was at that time the ultimate institution managing the polytechnic sector in London. Then came another line of development for us, and that was because of high graduate unemployment. The Manpower Services Commission was looking for ways of converting the educational preparation of graduates to something where they could gain employment in industry. Well, with the support of the Manpower Services Commission, we developed first a master's degree program for information systems engineering, and also a course especially for women in higher technician courses, and our graduate school, which was first established by this Manpower Services sponsorship. The graduate school grew to be over 200 strong, and the department's student numbers rose to well over 1,000. By that time, slowly, we were given permission to appoint new staff. The problem always was that first you had to do the development. First the students had to come, and only afterwards would the staff complement increase. So we had a chronic shortage of staffing while we were doing this, this work together of turning our engineering department into a modern computer-oriented department of electronic engineering. Now, throughout this time, I thought it was necessary for me to stay in touch with industry, and that could only be done by being a consultant. So I worked as an industrial consultant to industries both in Britain and abroad. The major clients of my consultancy activities were British Telecom and Siemens, but also smaller organizations. And I also worked for the Admiralty, and also as advisor to universities, both in Britain and abroad. These activities benefited the department because they spun off research projects which departmental staff and postgraduate students of the department could participate in. So the consultancy activities were integrated into my work at South Bank. But after about 9 or 10 years, it seemed to me that I had done what I wanted to do. The department can run itself. By then, new initiatives and directions for further development came from the staff. I was no longer the driving force against a reluctant group of followers. Young new staff included some brilliant and and forward-looking members. So I thought it was time to leave. After 10 years, I quit. It was early retirement. I thereafter continued for another over 10 years being a full-time consultant. And I really had no further contact with South Bank. I hope that it is developing well, and it is my plan in the near future to come and pay a visit. I should like to see how in the time since I have left under new leadership and new development, the organization grew. There's an aspect I want to mention just before I finish, and that is, while I was at South Bank, as far as I am aware, I was the only woman head of any engineering department in the country. During my tenure at South Bank, there was, in fact, in 1984, there was a national survey of all electrical engineering departments in the country. It was, and I'm looking here at the reference of it, it was done by the International Journal of Electrical Engineering Education. And they found a fair number of women who were working in electrical engineering departments in the country, something like 20. And there are profiles here in that issue of the journal of all the women that they had found. By far the largest number of women working in electrical engineering departments were at South Bank. Unbeknown to me, the journalist asked members of my women's staff why they came to South Bank. Was it because there was a woman head? They said yes, this was the reason why they applied. They felt that perhaps they would be fairly treated in a department where the head was a woman. I must say, I was not aware of this at the time when I was interviewing members of staff for new appointments. I don't believe in positive discrimination. Indeed, I don't believe in discrimination of any sort. I think positive discrimination would undermine the confidence of the person in favor of whom the discrimination is meant to be, because they would never know whether they gain some position because of their own merit, or is it because of the policy of positive discrimination. These women who worked in my department were more than deserving of the opportunities that were given them by their job, and they worked flawlessly, dedicatedly. I must say, I was delighted to have a large number, a larger number than anywhere else, of women staff working for me when I was at South Bank. Well, this is all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
What a truly amazing story, personality. Oh, that was a joy to listen to. And we'll certainly be looking forward to Dr. Kaposi visits here at Lsbu. Our next speaker is, we have Claire Miller. She is the Director of Technology and Innovation of Octopus Electric Vehicles, part of Octopus Energy Group. Claire works at the cutting edge of consumers' EV adoption and uses cases for a smart connected grid, including vehicle to grid and smart charging. She is passionate about bringing new technologies to market and into the hands of real users to make a positive impact around us. Claire came to Octopus Electric Vehicles following an extensive career in R&D and innovation that spanned sectors including IoT tech, medical advices, and took her around the world from US to China. She is responsible for delivery of Hive during their startup to scale-up period. Claire holds a Master in Engineering from Imperial College London. Claire, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'd just like to say thank you to Dean and the organiser of the event for inviting me to speak. And it really is an incredible achievement for LSBU to be celebrating 100 years of educating women engineers, and to be speaking also on International Women in Engineering Day is a real pleasure. To follow Agnes Kaposi is quite a challenge in itself, so I will do my best, but I really, really enjoyed her speech in particular, and everything she's been through, and I can only hope to emulate at least part of her career. So the picture that you can see on the screen now is of me and of my home, and in fact there were interesting echoes with what Professor Caposi said about her career. My house is actually in the shadow of the BT R&D Centre out in Suffolk. So I do wonder if she ever came this way in her consultancy work. And the other things that are interesting to note in this picture are an electric vehicle which is connected to a special charger. And this is my work, part of my work at the moment in my role as Director of Technology and Innovation. And I also noted what she said about big systems under computer control, because really this is the very cutting edge of where energy and mobility technologies meet computer control systems. So this is a project to explore taking energy from electric vehicles and putting it back through the home and onto the national grid. So it really is a very exciting project to be involved in. And as an engineer, as a mechanical engineer by training, and as an engineer, a very broad experience and interest over the years of my career. This really does bring together all of the opportunities and all of the technologies that I like to get my hands on. So as well as being the technical director and having a team to deliver, I like to keep my hands in as well and keep my engineering problem solving going. When I was asked to do this talk, I was asked to think about my career as an engineer and as a woman in engineering, and my experiences and how I could reflect that forward for those who may be at the start or the earlier in their career. And I will talk a bit about my experiences and the path that I went through, but really the key takeaways I'm going to cover are to start early with girls and young women, to get them enthused and excited about engineering. It's really, about solving problems and about bringing your whole self to that challenge, whatever your personality, whatever your particular interests are, and to enable that from a very young age, to make sure that we are providing safe places for women to learn, to fail, to find out how to do things better, and to make sure we're doing that in education and in the workplace. And finally, to make sure we're providing opportunities for real engineering experiences for our young people, for our young women, as again, they're in education and through into their career, and how we can support them through those very important sort of young years as young adults, finding their way into engineering. So I'd also like to say it was interesting that Ruth Mclaude spoke about the earliest courses in electricity in the home, because really that's really where my career has brought me to date, because I spend a lot of time looking at the electricity distribution boards and equipment in my home. So I think I would have done quite well to take that early course, actually. So I'll be looking up that prospectus after the speech. But in my earliest years as a child, I was very curious about machines and systems. And excuse me, I always wanted to know, how does it work? I was aware from a young age that everything in the world is designed, that anything that's made has been designed. And that was really supported by my mum in particular. She really wanted to study engineering, but was pushed down a more administrative and secretarial route, but always found outlets, and still does today, for her love of technology and problem solving. And so from a young age, she helped me by providing all kinds of experiences and toys. And I think this plays to my first point about starting young. Unfortunately, since my childhood, some 35 years ago, in my early years. I feel like we've actually gone backwards, not forwards, in terms of gender segregation, in terms of toys that are available, in terms of blue versus pink, and separating along gender lines. I find it incredibly depressing, honestly. And as the mother of 2 young children myself, I find I have to work very hard to make sure that there is a balance and that gender doesn't come into the toys that I'm offering them, because all toys should be available to all children. So I think if there's one thing that I can ask people to take away from this, whether you're a parent or whether you have any influence over young children, is to make sure that they're getting experiences with all kinds of toys. And for young female children, that often means that they aren't being exposed to construction toys, to building toys, to messy toys, to those real problem-solving opportunities from a young age. Maybe encouraged not to get dirty and messy, where their counterparts, male counterparts, might be outside building and breaking and using tools. I think it's so important that we are looking for opportunities to offer all kinds of experiences to our young people. As I grew through my school years, my interest and passion for problem solving, building and fixing continued. Although, again, a little bit like Professor Caposi, I had aspirations to become a physicist, but a very insightful teacher coached me that my problem solving and hands-on passion would actually be much better used in engineering. And I'm very glad that they did have that chat with me. I was also keen to get practical experience to understand what is engineering. And I think that's another challenge that we can all bring ourselves to helping to solve, which is engineering can be quite a hard word to understand, quite hard to break down. It's a bit harder than saying medicine or dentistry. Those are professions that we understand and we have access to on a frequent basis, whereas engineering is so broad, actually giving some experiences as early as possible, I think, can open up the eyes of young people, and young women in particular, to the very broad range of opportunities in engineering and the very, excuse me, many different disciplines that are out there. So I'm from near Cambridge, and I therefore was able to take advantage of many different kinds of engineering companies around Cambridge. And I gained lots of experience early on. So I'm very grateful to those companies for giving me a week's work experience or a summer's internship. In fact, I spent a gap year in industry before I went to university, working with medical systems and control software. I did go to London to study. I was at Imperial College studying mechanical engineering. There was a distinct gender bias. There was about 15 to 20% of the course were women, which even then was quite good. And this was in the year 2000 when I started. It's interesting that Ruth Mclaude noted about the number of people finishing their degree and the number of women as part of that. I'll come on to some figures in a moment, but although there was quite a high dropout, we finished with 66 students in our year, 10 of whom were women. And so we definitely had a better sticking rate to get the women to the end of the course. But it was a very heavily male environment. And again, it was with the support of tutors and lecturers who didn't see that difference. They just saw us as individuals and saw us for our own individual strengths. So I have a lot to thank Imperial for, because it was a really supportive environment. When I left university, I went into consulting, and I joined a consultancy, PA Consulting, joined their technology and innovation practice, because I wanted to get as broader experience as possible, helping companies to solve challenges day by day. And that gave me the opportunity to travel. I spent time living in the US and across Europe, and also later in my career, I spent quite a lot of time in China. And what I found at PA was that, again, a real positive environment for working, and respect for everybody, including women engineers. And so it was a very supportive environment in which to feel safe to try things and to learn and to improvise and to fail sometimes as well. And I think it's so important to have that safe space. I think women are disproportionately concerned about failure, concerned about being judged, maybe because they've had to try much harder and prove themselves to get to that position. And it can be a counterproductive environment, and it can actually undermine your ability to perform. So that's another really important point I'd like to make, is thinking about how we can make all of our workplaces safe places to practice and to therefore perform your best. I was also lucky in my early career to win a prize called the Engineering Leadership Award from the Royal Academy of Engineering. And that was also really formative in my experiences. Another really great experience to be exposed to. And I think if there's something else we can do to help engineers and women engineers as they come through, is to make sure that we shout about all of these schemes and opportunities that are available. And make sure we're getting out to all corners of our engineering education system, because there are some fantastic schemes out there. We're very, very lucky in this country. And I'm a very grateful recipient of that one in particular. So throughout my career, I was able to practice and learn and explore what I was interested in. And Dean, if you'd like to move to the next slide, please. But what I've found out in doing some research for today's event is actually the number of engineers in the UK that are women is still incredibly small. And actually, if we're talking to girls of those and women of those formative years, that sort of GCSE to A-level period, where they are making decisions about their career, their next steps, be that into university, be that into other technical training, maybe into apprenticeship, only around a quarter of those girls would even consider a career in engineering. And that just shows how much work there is still to do. That said, of the female engineering students earning those highest marks in their degrees, they're 5% more from these figures from the Women's Engineering Society than the male students. So again, I think there's something interesting there about when women are in the position to learn and to study in engineering, they are coming out with really fantastic results and go on to be really inspirational and fantastic engineers. So I found these figures quite sobering. And so it's another reason why I'm grateful to have this opportunity to speak at today's event. And Dean, if you'd like to move on to the last of my slides. So in summing up, I really feel that in terms of my experiences to date as a woman in engineering, what can we do to help improve the situation? And I can bring my experiences. So I would say early experiences and opportunity can make all the difference. And they really made all the difference to me. So start early, making all kinds of toys and all experiences available to girls and young women. No toy, no experience, no challenge should be off limits to any young woman throughout her life. And the next point then is safe places, making our teams and our companies safe places for women to take risks, to fail, learn and improve. So where we have women engineers coming into organizations for work experience, for placements and in their early career, making sure that we are consciously and actively making that environment a safe place for them to be themselves, to bring their whole selves to work and to be able to take risks and learn without fear of any repercussions, and to encourage them to really bring their best self to work. And the final point I'd like to make is to offer real experience to our aspiring women engineers and how we can challenge ourselves now as women who are maybe a bit further on in our careers in engineering. Can we make work placements? Can we set up gap years? Can we offer holiday and internships? How can we make real experiences available to young women to encourage them to take those first steps into engineering and to really start to experience what a fantastic career and an opportunity it really is. So I'd like to say thank you again to the organisers for asking me to speak today, and I wish you all the best with the rest of the programme today.
Thank you, Claire. So be curious, creative, inspire, hand-on to solve global challenges. Well, Claire, thank you very much for sharing your story with us today. You also talked about starting early to inspire new generation. So now the next speaker is, we have a short fire questions with young aspiring engineer. Dean actually had fun talking to Arsalan. Let's hear his story. Let's hear about his engineering heroes.
And welcome to an inspiring talk from a young aspiring engineer. I have Arsalan here. So Arsalan, can you tell me a bit about yourself in terms of your studies and what you want to do in the future in that sense?
I want to be an engineer because my favorite subjects, as in maths, science, computer science, are all in engineering. Yeah.
Okay. And what interests you about a career in engineering exactly? Is there something that inspires you in terms of a specific pathway into engineering, or is it more the subjects that you're studying at this moment in time?
It's to do with the subjects I'm studying. Also, there's a wide thing. There's like a lot of careers in engineering, like computer engineering, you can building with engineering, all that stuff. Also, my mom and dad are engineer. My mom is an engineer, so yeah.
And that excites you mostly in terms of working in engineering, like those sort of pathways, as well as your parents both being engineers themselves in that sense?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Is there anything that you can think of that might stop you from getting a career in engineering?
I would say your friends. So let's say you have good grades in the in like maths or science, yeah, and your friends don't get as good grades, so they want to demotivate you, basically, to make you want to do the same job or something at level to them.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's more about your surroundings in that sense, what your friends may, want to do in their future that may hinder you in that sense from getting a career in engineering in that sense.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really good, and that's interesting to hear in that sense. And last but not least, what would you do to promote engineering to females in that sense? So guessing you are in classes with other females in that sense. Is there anything you would do personally to maybe promote engineering to them?
So what I would do is first say that engineering is gender neutral. So like anybody can do it. You're not just restricted because of your gender to do one job. Yeah. Also, I would try to, if I was a teacher, I would try to put more engineering stuff into their teachings to see if they would do it or not, to make them more promoted into doing that engineering if they're good at that subject.
Okay, that's very interesting to hear. Thank you very much, Arsalan, and good luck with your studies, and we hope that you become an engineer very soon indeed.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so too.
Thank you.
My mom is an engineer, so is my dad. Absolutely love it. It's just it goes to engineering heroes for our young Arsalan. He had a message, and it appears to be across the board, is we need to educate children at a younger age, and are the schools doing enough? This is one of the questions that the panelists will be addressing later. But for the time being, I would like to introduce our next speaker. So we have Steve Gladman, which is founder of Women Power Smart Energy, fireside with chat with Narmeen Rehman, which is who works in distributing energy. So Narmeen is a chartered mechanical engineer with nearly 9 years of experience in the nuclear energy industry across energy strategy and project management. She is a passionate advocate of diversity and gender balance with board experience at Institute of Mechanical Engineering. She served 3 years on the Young Professional Board with the WISE campaign. She's currently acting as the regional lead for London and Southeast for Women in Nuclear UK Society. Narmeen is the winner of WIN Champion of the Year National Award 2017 and has recently been announced winner of the Rising Star Award by Women Power Smart Energy in 2018. 2021. Joining her is Steve Gladman, who has worked with the renewable energy industry since 2010 and has collaborated with major UK players in the solar industry, from engineer developers, global supply chain to investors and asset managers. So Steve studied law and is noted in the smart energy sector as providing networking and conferencing under the banner of Women Powering Smart Energy. So this event has been very important in connecting businesses, expanding networks in energy industry, informing and enlightening on policy, market trends, and business opportunities. So Steve and Narmeen, thank you very much for joining us today.
So thank you, Suela, for the introduction. And thank you very much to LSBU for inviting me to participate in the celebration and recognition of 100 years of teaching women in engineering. I'm very grateful for that, very flattered and absolutely honoured. I think it's hugely important to recognise and celebrate these achievements. Now, obviously, engineers play the most critical role in delivering the energy transition, from bringing new technologies to market, designing and building systems and power plants, to grid integration and shaping policy. Now, engineering, I'm not an engineer, and engineering to me is a little like witchcraft. I'm amazed by it, and I'm amazed by everybody that's involved in it, but I don't understand it. But working with engineers over the past 10 years in the renewable sector, I can see that some of the best engineers in the energy sector are women, but women are still grossly underrepresented in that industry, in the numbers, at the front end, or the coalface, if you like, at the meetings I attend, at the conferences I attend. So I started a business networking and conferencing platform called Women Powering Smart Energy as my way of trying to correct some of those imbalances. I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon by Narmeen Raymond. Narmeen, as you've just heard, is a chartered mechanical engineer, has worked in the smart energy industry for the past 9 years and has won multi-industry awards for her work. And she's here today to give us some insights of her journey into engineering in the energy sector particularly. Welcome, Narmeen, and thank you for joining and sharing your experience. I'm really pleased that you've agreed to do this with me. And as I was just saying, you know, engineering to me is a bit like witchcraft. I'm amazed by it. And I always think, you know, how do engineers become engineers? At what stage of their life do they decide that's what they want to do? So maybe you can tell us a little about your background, your family life, your formal education, and where your drive and passion to become an engineer came from.
Yeah, thank you very much, Steve and Suela, for that kind and generous introduction. It's an honor to be invited to speak here today as part of LSBU centenary celebrations, and also on International Women in Engineering Day. So as you asked, my background is that I grew up in East London in a small family from a working class background. I went to a state school, which was a girls' school in East London. And my mum instilled like a strong importance on education and particularly science on both me and my brother. So I was always curious about how things worked and design and how they could be improved when I saw problems. And at that time in school, there was no concept of STEM or even what engineering is. And there were none of these great initiatives that we have here today. And also when I was growing up, I had like quite interest in sports cars. And when I was about 13 or 14, I started really watching Formula One racing. And that's where I thought, wow, this is great. You know, I want to design something that goes that fast. And so that's kind of where my engineering passion sparked off from. And I learned more about how it uses science and maths to solve all sorts of problems in the world. And yeah, I think So part of my journey, like my biggest hurdle was actually education in terms of getting the right qualifications and the GCSEs. So my school had decided to trial triple science GCSE by doing GCSE biology 1 year early in year 10, and then chemistry in year 11, and physics was supposed to be after school spread over the 2 years. Disappointingly, it didn't quite work out that way, and we were not actually taught physics. And this is when I kind of panicked, when I realized that this was a barrier in terms of me embarking on an engineering journey towards getting an engineering degree. And the context was that even though I had passed my biology GCSE and 2 other girls, none of the other students or teachers really kind of cared. They just said to me, oh, well, you can just do a remedial year, retake physics and then do it from there. It didn't really, matter to them. There was no kind of support on kind of careers or industry. So I remember, crying to my mom, and she said to me, don't worry about the school. You can put in the hard work yourself. I'll get you the books and the support and extra tuition. And you want to make this happen, so you can do it, do the hard work. And so I did that, and I came out with the right GCSEs, and I was able to carry on with A levels and do my engineering degree. So I think for me that was quite an early challenge that I had. If I hadn't known that I wanted to embark on this career, I might not be where I am today.
Sure. So you were primary school age when you first got interested in Formula One and engineering. Was it that early in your life that you decided that was a course of interest, at least for you?
Yeah, I would say I was very interested in cars and science in primary, and it was more in secondary where I became more specifically interested in Formula One.
Sure. So state education was obviously useful to you, but the curriculum didn't necessarily lend itself to shaping your career. That came later when you went to university, I guess, but you were driven and pushed by your family, which was the thing missing from the schooling.
Yeah, that was a real challenge, like the teachers, we had a string of non-science supply teachers who basically said, please read the textbook, and then they just read magazines. So that really let me down.
So maybe they weren't so educated about engineering as they could have been, but maybe if it was brought into the curriculum, it could be dealt with a lot better. So you got your GCSEs, your A levels. You then got a place at Oxford University to study engineering science.
Yes. So at Oxford, the course is called engineering science. So you study kind of all disciplines and the science behind the engineering, and you specialize later on. So I chose to specialize towards mechanical engineering because that aligned with my interests, and it was broad. And it was lovely because although, women were still the minority, I would say probably about 10-15% of us were women, but just being in an environment where everyone was passionate about learning and engineering application, it was really great and nurturing for me.
And what were the tutors like there? What was the course like? How did you find the support and help from the course and your tutors?
Yeah, the course was very interesting. You do the foundations, and there's a mixture of tutors. So there's some younger ones and some obviously who've been there for a long time, and they're used to more traditional methods of teaching, like overhead projectors, and some more modern ones. But they're all very supportive. You do have to push yourself quite a lot. Again, that innate drive to self-learn comes in very useful.
Yeah. So after your formal education, you left university, you got a job to start your career through a graduate scheme, and you ended up working in the nuclear industry. How did you find that?
Yeah, so I became very interested about environment and sustainability, and I wanted to solve climate change. That's why I got into the nuclear energy industry. I embarked on a graduate stream, like you said, and I was on the mechanical stream. And I was one of the largest cohort of that year. So I didn't really notice the lack of women too much in the beginning because we were put together in a group of, chemists, environmental people on all different streams. But it was only when I got to do my first placement at a real operational nuclear site that I noticed, when we're in groups of 5 or 6, that actually there's a huge gender bias here in the technical engineering roles, not so much the administrative side. And first, I had like practical things to consider in terms of getting the appropriate PPE, so the protective personal equipment. It's not typically sized for women, so you have to make adjustments. And then I remember, my first placement being in maintenance, where I had to really ask the technicians that I would like to go out with you on this job, and first they would say, yes, of course, but then they would go out, complete the job, and without me, and I'll find out about it later. So it's really disappointing for me. I didn't understand why they didn't take me seriously, but I had to keep kind of persisting and saying, I want to come out with you. I want to overhaul this valve. Please give me the spanner. Then eventually they did take me with them and let me, do some hands-on. They understood that I was keen to get that. So you do have to put in, I did have to put in a lot of effort in the beginning to build those relationships.
Sure. And so that was your sort of initial experience of going to work for the first time in what is obviously a male dominated industry. It was then, it possibly still is now. How have things changed over the 9 years as far as you can see?
So I think when I moved on to the technical side of engineering, there was more women, but still significantly small. And over the time, I think it is improving, and I have seen like more women entering the industry, but it's still very small. And that's why I decided to be more active with organizations such as Women in Science and Engineering and joined their board to encourage awareness. I realized, okay, although there was a gap in terms of, my educational and initial thing, in the real like practical working world, there's significantly bigger gap.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of companies now have D&I policies. What's your experience of the implementation of those? And at work, are they working, do you think? Or are they more a box ticking exercise? I mean, putting theory into practice, are they working, and are your male colleagues pursuant to these policies, do you think?
I think the D&I policies initiatives, they're very well intentioned, and they are trying, and I think they are making a difference, because I think as Claire referred to, there's only 12% of women in engineering in the UK, but very recent studies from Engineering UK, I think just announced yesterday, shows that figure has actually risen from 2018 to 14.5%. So all these things are making a difference. And for me, the initiatives at my organization helped me to get involved in external organizations such as WISE, which gave me a bigger platform to garner support. But I do remember when I joined the WISE Young Women's Board, and I, explained to my male colleagues, they asked me, are you going to go off and do knitting and drink tea in your like women's club, jokingly? And I explained to them that no, this is not the intention of WISE, and that you are most welcome to join. It's open to everyone, male, female, young, old, engineer, non-engineer, anyone. And I try to gently encourage them. But I think in reality, sometimes men do feel that it's potentially a women's issue. But the change I've seen now, especially in my experience with Sizewell C Gender Balance Networks, that there's a more visible emergence of men as allies, which is really encouraging to see.
Yeah, I think that's really important. As Sandra said right from the beginning, it's going to involve everyone in shifting the impetus in making sure that true equality and diversity and inclusion is a working thing. It's no longer something we have to keep talking about, but it will involve men as much as women, if not more, perhaps. So what do you think the biggest issues are that women sort of in engineering still face in the sector?
I think from my experience, one of the things that bothers me, and I know from my networks that bothers a lot of women, is simply being ignored and not listened to, or sometimes, the worst case, not even being directly spoken to. Like, for example, when I've been leading some engineering projects, sometimes people have not acknowledged or accepted me as the lead and, you know, respected the authority devolved to me by senior leaders. If I've asked a question, they will look to my male colleague to validate it before even answering. So those kinds of small things I think mean a lot, because it's essentially about respecting the person and the value and the skills they bring.
So it's these unconscious biases which still permeate through not just the energy sector, but, you know, the work environment, and it's still very prevalent. So looking to the future, and not the distant future, but the now, the here and now, what do you think personally, you know, needs to change to make equality and diversity and inclusion something which is less of an issue to reach? Canada runs something called 30 by 30, which is wanting to get qualified, certified female women engineers into engineering 30% by the year 2030. Initiatives like this with Engineering UK, they have something similar with their EID strategy. What do you feel, Narmeen, is, you know, hugely, what's the two most important things that need to change, do you think?
I think personally, before, I haven't really been so comfortable with the idea of quotas and kind of positive discrimination, but I do see the need for having quantitative and measurable targets. So I do agree that there need to be stronger D&I policies with measurable targets and accountability from the top. I think it really needs to be driven from the CEO D&I agenda and is to permeate through the organization. I don't think it's enough for organizations to say, we have a women's network, we're signed up to WISE, we're signed up to Women in Nuclear, and they don't follow it through in practical steps. So I think if an organization, you know, signs up to these, they need to then use the tools. For example, you know, WISE has a 10 steps program, which is an evidence-based program to identify areas that businesses can use to build more diverse, you know, strategies and policies. So they need to hold themselves accountable. And if it's not at the top of, you know, the managing director's agenda, it won't get factored into the daily micro decisions.
Sure. Well, hopefully with the rise of ESG investing and measurement and the metrics against all that, you know, and the Build Back Better, the green revolution, maybe these changes will happen a lot quicker, where, you know, diversity and inclusion is one key element in the governance side of that ESG. But it won't come soon enough, I agree. And as I say, I think the 30 by 30, the 30% is a sort of a tipping point figure, which is recognized as once you get to 30%, you get past it, it sort of snowballs and becomes the norm. I hope we can all reach that quicker, as I say, sooner rather than later. Now, I mean, I think what you're doing is brilliant. I think what all the speakers today are doing is brilliant. I really appreciate you joining me for this discussion. I look forward to chatting with you again on the panel. But for now, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Cheers.
So science, math, cars, Formula One. Well, I love those words. Inspirational family, men as allies. Thank you for being our engineering heroes at LSBU 100 and International Women in Engineering Day. You were both amazing. Thank you. So I will move on to the next speaker. So it is the 4 C's of engineering. So curious, creative, challenging and collaborative. This is Susan Mcdonald from Energy Transition. Susan is an award-winning electrical and mechanical engineer and has over 11 years of experience in designing and delivering strategic transformations programs for clients from the power, utilities, and renewable sector. Susan supports her clients to shape their net zero strategies, transform their businesses, and guide them through the energy transition. Let's hear Susan McDonald. Thank you.
Well, first of all, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Susan McDonald, and I'm an electrical and mechanical engineer. I'm delighted to be celebrating LSBU 100 and, of course, International Women in Engineering Day with you today. What I'm going to share with you is just my insights and my journey into engineering, and importantly, how through some of my experiences, we can do more to amplify the exciting opportunities that a career in engineering offers. So first of all, it's probably helpful to discuss what started me into the engineering career. And I think, first of all, it's giving you a sense of who I am as a person. So you probably have guessed from my accent, I'm originally from Scotland in Glasgow. And when I went to school, I was always inspired to reach my potential, and nothing was out of bounds. And I think part of that was possibly because I went to a incredible all-girls school at the time called Craycon School. And second of all, just to give you a sense of, I think it does have a slight influence, but my mother is a podiatrist, so a fit doctor, if you haven't heard that term before, and my father is an engineer. And really, early in my career, I actually wanted to be a vet. I love animals, and I started work quite early. So I did some volunteering, aged 14, getting some practical experience at vet practice. And I think that's something I just want to put a tab on, because I think those moments and that early experience is important to test out what career you may be interested in. But really a key stage in my career and my journey into engineering was the inspiration from an educational and science programme called the Scottish Space School. So I was at the age of 16, excited through a series of competitions and submissions and maths and physics problems that I was selected to be one of very few students across Scotland to visit NASA in Texas. And you can imagine at age 16 what an experience that brings, being able to work alongside Mars rover engineers and building your own small Lego inspired rover and putting that to the test, where NASA had been testing some of the early stage pilots for the Mars rover. And being able to even speak to the British and American astronaut Michael Foley as he was in the International Space Station. And that was a really pivotal point in my career into engineering, because I just got the breadth of what being an engineer meant and how you could be involved in so many fields of expertise and how that could support society addressing some of our biggest problems. And so really from that stage, not one to quickly just flip from being a vet into an engineer, I did some further science programs. And a thread that is in my career is always renewables and net zero, where I was part of a group specifically aimed at inspiring female students into engineering, and it was called the Green Design Challenge, organised through universities, where we had to make and be creative, creating wind turbines out of balsa wood, and creating a business case of the financial management of that project going forward. And really that inspired and triggered my career into engineering. Looking to then where I went into further education, I studied electrical and mechanical engineering at the University of Strathclyde. And there it was 5 years. And what was important was, alongside my engineering degree, I was awarded the Institution of Engineering and Technology Power Academy Scholarship, sponsored by National Grid, that enabled me every summer to get practical experience of my engineering. And to bring that to life, what I really loved the most was I got the opportunity to work in the National Electricity Control Centre. And that struck me the most because one evening, having worked in the control centre, balancing supply and demand, and keeping the lights on, I actually flew back to my hometown in Glasgow, and it was an evening. And what was really amazing was looking out that plane window down and knowing only hours before I was part of a team helping maintain the lights staying on. And I think what I found interesting and certainly focus in my university career was how I could use my engineering and apply that to benefit all parts of society. So when I was at university, I had the opportunity to go to the Gambia, my fantastic first opportunity going to Africa, where using our engineering skills, working with local engineers to put in solar panels to enable people, and particularly girls, to get education and support healthcare and communities have much needed electricity. And so moving into my journey into the world of work, the key motivation and very much since the beginning was always renewables and networks and how the electricity system worked. So I joined National Grid and I was there for 6 years. And one of my most exciting experiences was leading the offshore wind projects in the UK. So I was actually responsible for leading 12 offshore wind projects. That was all of Scotland's, including projects called Dogger Bank in East Anglia, which you may have read in the news. And that for me was just a motivating time in my career. It was understanding the technical aspects of connecting an offshore wind farm, but also how you collaborate as an engineer, understanding the investment decisions, the policy requirements. And since being at National Grid, I've moved into consulting. So I consult into power, utility and renewable companies. And that's enabled me to apply my industry insights and experience and helping my clients improve how they either manage assets, how they drive changes and improvements and optimize engineering processes. And I've been with Deloitte now just coming up to 4 years. And I've really enjoyed the ability to get a global view of clients who have energy services and the work that they do. I think also just recognizing that as an engineer, there's some fantastic experiences that it offers, but your skill set can be applied to many things. And one of my passions is around how we address climate change. And so I've been a volunteer in a research expedition that took me all the way to the Arctic. It was slightly cold. It was minus 55 degrees Celsius with wind chill, but it was a fantastic opportunity to work alongside teachers, other engineers, and people, just citizens passionate about the topic and helping to measure and assess climate change at the Arctic Circle. I've had the privilege and the honor to be recognized through awards. And I think that's an important point to make, because those have provided me personally a platform not only to celebrate being an engineer, but also to help hopefully inspire others to pursue an engineering career. And so taking a step back and reflecting across those stages of my career, I just wanted to leave 4 key things. And importantly, what does that mean in terms of what we each can do? The first thing for me, the 4 C's of engineering. For me, engineering is about being curious. And I think importantly, as we look to how do we inspire young people, importantly females, into the career of engineering, we need to ensure that we are investing and continuing to support that curiosity at an early stage. So I think back at my career, that opportunity to go to Scottish Space School, to be part of that UK-based Green Design Challenge, they gave me the opportunity to realize what an engineer means and see the art of the possible. So I think that's really critical as we look at how we motivate people into the career of engineering. The second is what I love the most about engineering is the creativity. What we need to be able to do is think about how we can be creative in providing the practical experiences at critical stages of people's careers. And I think importantly, it's not just about people's moving into engineering from school into education, or be that through foundational courses or vocational courses. It's also about people actually transferring midway through their careers. So we need to be more creative of how we inspire people and give them that practical experience to see how rewarding a career can be. The third 4C is be challenging. I think the rewarding aspect of being an engineer is sparking new ideas to solve problems that tackle society's biggest challenges and opportunities. So we need to challenge ourselves of how can we be bolder to encourage people into engineering? And importantly, how do we ensure that we support people to apply their skills in different ways? I think we'll all reflect that the last 18 months has been very uncertain. And I normally work in the energy sector, but I applied my engineering to help make sure testing was more accessible to all parts of society. For example, making sure that people at home who may be blind and partially sighted or deaf had access to COVID testing. And so we have to think differently of how we apply the talents and skills that we have both at school and university, and how we open those up in people's careers. And I think finally, be collaborative. The fantastic thing about engineering and what I enjoy the most is being able to work with such a diverse set of individuals and the ability to learn. And I think importantly, we've got to start learning more about how can we be more focused and targeted at supporting people make moves into the role of engineering. How can we ensure that we also retain them so people aren't exiting engineering at key stages of their career? And to be collaborative, we need to work together both as an academic and private sector and with our academies and institutions, because there is such a fantastic world and career out there. And we have some big challenges as a society to overcome, not least COVID, but as we look towards the end of this year in my hometown of Glasgow, COP26, how are we ensuring that we're building a sustainable future that we all look forward to live in? So I just want to leave with you, it's a fantastic panel and event to be part of. For those considering careers in engineering, it is a golden ticket. And for those in engineering, I'm so excited for the careers you have ahead of you. And thank you very much for the time today.
Thank you, Susan, for sharing your insight and journey into engineering and discussing with us the importance of being curious, creative, pushing the limits and working together to provide solutions to global challenges. Thank you for celebrating with us and being our engineering hero. I'll move on to the next speaker. So we have Sana Hafiz. So Sana Hafiz, she studied chemical and process engineering at London South Bank University. She is currently working towards completing a PhD in chemical engineering with focus on production of renewable fuels in microreactors. So Sana, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for the introduction, Savannah. My name is Sana and I'm a PhD researcher in the Chemical Process Department here at London South Bank. So I'll briefly be going over a background about myself and then a brief overview of my current research here at Lsbu. Then I'll talk about some of my achievements and how engineering has been a really rewarding career path for me and how I think we can encourage more women into engineering. So I obtained my undergraduate degree in chemical process engineering here at South Bank. And then I was made an offer to study a fully funded PhD, which I then continued on with my research. I've also been working as a computer lab demonstrator to the undergraduate students. So a little bit about my research. As chemical engineers, it's really important to tackle the current problems that we have today. And one of the bigger problems we have is, of course, the issue of using fossil fuels. So we're looking to move on to looking at alternative renewable fuels such as hydrogen power or bioenergy. And for my PhD, we're looking at how we can take these renewable fuel production reactions and make them better, intensify them, so we can implement them on a larger scale. So some of the consequences we all know of burning fossil fuels is, of course, we release CO2 into the environment, and CO2, of course, causes global warming. As well as CO2, we have other toxic gases like sulfur and nitrogen, which contribute to acid rain. And also we have solid emissions, which can, if you breathe them in, it can cause respiratory diseases. So essentially, my research is focused on implementing these really small microreactors and using them for biofuel production or for hydrogen production. So normally the reactors that we see in the chemical industries are huge. So microreactors are much, much smaller. You can see, you can compare them to the size of a coin, but they offer a lot more advantageous properties, and we can use them for the fuel synthesis reaction, which is something relatively new. It started in the last decade or so. So some of the advantages that we have when we compare them to the larger reactors is, of course, we have higher conversions because of the improved mass and heat transfer. They offer much higher surface area to volume ratios, shorter residence times, and the most important, I think, is when we compare these reactions, they often take place at really high temperatures and really high pressures, which isn't good for the environment at all. So the microreactors allow us to conduct the same reaction, but under much milder conditions. So just to show you the types of microreactors that have been investigated experimentally. So what I do is I take different configurations, such as the packed bed microreactor, coated wall, for example, and I study them theoretically to see how their performance enhances the current processes that we have today. So we have a wide variety that can be implemented for various different types of reactions. So starting the PhD at Lsbu has been a great experience because the first time I got results, we realized that it's relatively new. No one's really doing it. So I was fortunate enough to write some papers about the models that I've produced and the results that we have. Just to get validation for the work. It's been a great experience. So this is more continued to the ones that I've done in the last 3 years. As well as publishing papers, I've attended several conferences so that we can present our work, micro reactor conferences, renewable energy reactor conferences. So my experience as to why I think there are less women in engineering is definitely the gender stereotype. So growing up, we were always told it's the men that typically take up engineering and women do other professions. Definitely the working environment as well, and the choices that we made when we were younger. The perception created by the media and the lack of female role models. So I think if we had more women in more leadership positions, then it would definitely make a difference in encouraging more women to take up engineering. I think what we can do is definitely encourage girls from the start. So I went to an all-girls school in secondary school, and we didn't have any talks by women coming in. We had one STEM talk and they were all men that came to speak to us. So I think it didn't really appeal to any of us to take engineering as a career at that point. Also seeing more women in leadership roles. So the leaders of our departments in chemical engineering, I think definitely women should take up those positions as well. And lastly, the work-life balance. So during LSBU, we used to go on field trips, which was a brilliant thing the department organized for us. And I remember going to a combined heat and power plant because it's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go into renewable energy, and out of like the 30 engineers that we had working on the day, there wasn't a single female. And that really stuck to me. And I remember asking the lead engineer why there weren't any women there. And he replied with, maybe it's the long working hours that don't encourage women to go into that, because they might have other responsibilities. They might be a mum. And they said they'll be working, you know, over 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's quite demanding. So I think what the industries could do is maybe perhaps implement part-time working or offer some flexible working hours, so that more chemical engineering graduates who are females could actually go into this career. So thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you, Sana, very much for giving insight into your research and working on renewable fuels, and also for providing some information or your thoughts on how we can make things better. Thank you very much for being our engineering hero today. So now I would like to hand over to Professor Deborah Johnson, LSBU Pro Vice Chancellor for Education, who will be hosting the panel discussion with all our speakers. Professor Johnson, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Suella. So it's my pleasure to host this panel. And I think it'd be really good, perhaps we could ask all of the panelists to put their video on, because it would be great to get everybody on screen if we can. We have been joined by two people that weren't with us earlier in the day. And so I'm going to ask both Deborah Andrews and Bridget Shield to introduce themselves. So I'll go to Deborah first. You're still on mute, Deborah, sorry.
Joys of tech. Yeah, I had an extensive educational career and I still can't operate Zoom. Okay, so sorry, I've been actually doing a really interesting event today, encouraging graduates to think about careers in research. So I'm sorry I wasn't available for the panel this afternoon. My research is sustainable design and manufacture and the circular economy. So my background was originally product design, but I moved into much more technical design. And having gone to art school and had, you know, purple hair and unfeasibly tight long skirts that meant you walked like a little duck. Having done all that stuff, I ended up working in the School of Engineering and studying for a PhD at Imperial College. So I like to think perhaps a sort of Renaissance woman, you know, an expert in some things, a good all-rounder and an expert in some fields. And although I'm an incorporated engineer, I'm more of an honorary engineer rather than a, you know, formally trained engineer.
So thank you, Deborah. We've now got that wonderful image of the way that engineering can work with other disciplines as well. And so I'm going to now ask Bridget to introduce herself. Bridget.
Right, thank you. And I'll just say I have been here for the whole event and I've really enjoyed it. I've been very impressed by all the speakers. It's been fascinating. And also, can I just apologise? I'm going to have to leave at about 5 to 5 because I've got another of these events to go to, Women in Acoustics, organised by the Association of Noise Consultants. Acoustics is my field, and I was at Southbank for nearly 30 years teaching and doing research in acoustics, and ended up as a professor of acoustics, and I'm now an emerita professor of acoustics. I've also been very involved in the Institute of Acoustics, which is the UK professional body for acoustics. And I'm very pleased to say from 2012 to 2014, I was the first woman president of the Institute of Acoustics. And to me, that's sort of a great achievement, one of the things I'm proudest of, because when I started, it was a very, very, very male-dominated society and dominated field of study. And things are gradually improving. So yeah, so that's me.
Thank you, Bridget. And because we know we don't have you for very long, I'm going to kick off with my first question for you, but then we'll move around the panel, and I hope to get to every one of you in due course. And so you started to talk about those challenges. I wonder if you'd want to tell us a bit more about, you know, how you overcame the challenges in your career journey, Bridget. So what were they and how did you overcome them?
Well, it was difficult. As I say, it was acoustics is a very male dominated, like other fields of engineering, very male dominated. And when I started at South Bank, the acoustics group it moved around as sort of departments were merged and things, but it was always, as it is everywhere, part of a very much larger engineering department. And there was a few years early on when we moved to a particular department. I won't tell you which one, but it was very, very male dominated. They weren't used to female staff, but they weren't used to people doing research. The culture was very hostile. It was, and actually very unpleasant at times. So that was a real challenge. And I, as a colleague who was with me briefly and then moved to another university, he said, "You're the wrong sex in the wrong subject in the wrong department." So you know, I just felt everybody was very suspicious of me, and life was hard. And there was also, and I hate to say this because things have now changed, but there was sort of, looking back, blatant sex discrimination. I was turned down for a promotion, I don't know, I think 4, 5 or 6 times, and each time a younger male colleague with far less experience got the post, and that was very depressing, obviously, and demoralizing. But the reason I stuck with it was because I absolutely loved my subject area. I loved the research that I was doing, and because I had research funding, I could be slightly independent of the rest of the department. And I had absolutely wonderful researchers. I always had a really, really good research team who were sort of terribly supportive. And I also got very involved in the Institute of Acoustics from fairly early on. And that helped as well, because colleagues in acoustics, sort of nationally and internationally, were very supportive. And so I sort of rather threw myself into that and into committee work for the Institute of Acoustics and so on, because it gave me something sort of outside the university. But as I say, things got very much better. The second half of my career at South Bank, things had improved, and hopefully, you know, that those problems have gone forever, we hope.
And then if we think about those improvements, Bridget, which ones do you think are the clearest? Where do you think the most progress has been made, particularly in the field of acoustics?
Well, in acoustics, I think it is the culture, the fact that there are so many more women. It's absolutely wonderful to, when I first started and I go to a conference, and quite often I was the only woman at a conference. Then, you know, sometimes there were 2, maybe 3, but it was quite common to be the only one. And that has changed hugely. There are now far more young women. It's still only about, I was looking at some figures yesterday, I think about 15% of the membership of the Institute of Acoustics are female, but it's getting better. And the other really encouraging thing is that a lot of the young women, I mean, I've seen my own students go out and develop very, very good careers, and they're now sort of leading companies and things. And they've also, within the professional institutes, which is the Institute of Acoustics and the Association of Noise Consultants, they're taking leading roles and chairing committees. And I also found if any flagging committee, when I was president, if any of the committees were flagging, you put a young woman on the committee, preferably as chair or as secretary, and they managed to revitalise it. So yes, so I've seen an enormous change.
And Bridget, when you were talking then, I saw quite a few people on the panel actually really nodding their heads. So I'm going to go to Nami next. I saw you when Bridget was talking about going to conferences and being being one of the few women there. I saw you really nodding your head. Is that something that you've experienced? And you know, when you talked earlier, you talked about a range of the challenges that that you've experienced in your journey to be where you are now. What was the biggest of all the challenges that you face? What was the biggest, and how did you overcome it? So Narmeen.
Thank you, Deborah. I think, yeah, firstly, I was sympathizing with what Bridget was saying about conferences, because I distinctly remember going to a IMechE nuclear lifting conference where there was hardly any women, and I tried to raise my hand up to ask at some of the seminars some questions, and I was continually ignored. And I also remember then when there was exhibitions by various companies, and I tried to ask some technical questions to someone, and the man just ignored me and then eventually answered my question but directed it to my male older colleague, and I was just flabbergasted and really quite upset. And later on my colleague said, "Oh, I think he thought you were like maybe my secretary or something." And that just kind of, and that was only a few years ago. It was quite upsetting. So I think in terms of the biggest challenge, it's always the next one you come across, isn't it? There's lots of barriers, but you just work your way through it, and it's only until you get to the next one. I think personally, the biggest challenge is not giving up. It's the persistence when you meet those challenges to think, there have been occasions where I've thought, is this really worth me carrying on now? And I always come back to, but I love engineering. I love solving problems. I love contributing to society. Yes, I do want to carry on.
So that persistence has sort of been the thing that sort of kept you facing those challenges. So actually then, just to kind of, turn to your achievements, what part of your work, Narmeen, has made you the most happy, the most proud?
I think for me, the thing I wanted when I understood more about engineering was attaining my professional chartership, because in my mind, I equated that with demonstrating not only on a national level, but an international level that I've acquired, certified technical, professional, and practical skills to be recognized. And when I got my chartership, that was one of my aims. I was so happy and excited that's really, I consider to be my greatest achievement.
Well, that's absolutely striking, absolutely striking. I'm going to ask that same question to Sana, because we were hearing about, your excitement about your PhD topic, and actually it's fabulous that it's already proved so productive, and it's in a field where, you're really making a difference. So just to ask you that question, what's the part of your work that makes you the happiest, where it's made you feel the most proud?
Definitely. So the PhD itself was really challenging when I started it. And because the topic was relatively new, there wasn't much to go on from literature as to what we were expecting results-wise. So the first time when I created a theoretical model and we ran it and I got the results, which were very good compared to the experimental results, we realized that we were really onto something, that we could really take these models and show how we can improve the fuel production process even further. So when I got the results for the first time, it was a really good feeling. But when we thought that, okay, maybe we could publish these in a good journal, that was a brilliant feeling when it came back saying, okay, your manuscript's been accepted. And it was the first paper that I published. And that was really important for me because it encouraged me to go on and publish more. It gave me the motivation to just work harder and harder in the PhD. And those publications, I've been fortunate enough to keep them coming through. And that's been a really great validation throughout my journey here at Lsbu, and I definitely would continue to pursue engineering as a degree in the future. Yeah.
So what would you say to a budding female engineer now? What would your advice be?
My advice would be to stick with it, because during the degree you realize that you're with a lot of men. There aren't that many women, so at some point you might lose the motivation to continue, but I'd say that keep going. You're just as good as the boys who might tell you that they're better than you or look down on you. And I'd really say to definitely find out about female role models. So for me, it was definitely the female professors in our department. They were really inspirational. So I would definitely say just go and have a chat with them, because they really encouraged me throughout my undergraduate degree to keep going. And they really inspired me to do the PhD as well. So that would be my advice.
Thank you, Sana. So on that note, I'm going to go to Deborah and ask her the question, why do we still have so few female engineers?
Oh, that's a big question. I think I would like to think that things are beginning to change a little bit. Slowly, as more younger women come into study. I think the challenge is actually convincing them or giving them the confidence to want to continue to work in the field once they've got their degree. So I work in engineering design, which is slightly different, and I think there's quite often more. We've never ever reached 50-50, which would be absolutely fantastic in terms of male and female students, but I think there's a high percentage of female students. But there's a little challenge about, you know, getting them to convert their qualification into, carry it into the workplace and stay in the field. So that's one issue, and it is confidence. But I suppose as you know, groups, younger students are more sort of accepting in some ways of each other, then, you know, that more managers, if we convert women, get confident, work in the industry, and you can be a role model and more women will follow through. I know that, you know, there are changes have happened. Certainly, I was fascinated to hear Bridget's accounts of working in engineering many years ago and how alienated and isolated she was by the system. But I do think that that is changing. Having said that, I work a lot. I've got a really big European research project developing a circular economy for the data center industry. Now that sector is quite fascinating. It's quite polarized. There are people who are, they're very, very old fashioned. I think they've come from, you know, very traditional engineering courses where they think about their own subject and nothing else, and they're not terribly accepting of anyone, men, women, or whatever, outside their own field. We also work with a lot of people who are very accepting, but it's interesting that, and this is sort of from, you know, the other side of the fence. I've got some colleagues who've worked in the sector for many, many years, probably since before the internet was invented in the late 1980s. But they notice now interestingly, there are a lot more women coming in, but they tend to be working in sustainability more than in, say, mechanical engineering or electrical engineering, whatever. So I think maybe sustainability, because of the, you know, the social aspect, the human aspect, perhaps that sustainable engineering in that respect, perhaps that attracts women. But again, if we can kind of, you know, subvert the system, get in the side door, you know, not necessarily have a takeover, but, you know, certainly you seem to be positive role models. I think that would be positive. But one thing, last thing on this point, last point here, one thing that concerns me a little bit is, and it's very close to home actually, is our university academies, which are quite engineering focused and technology focused. And most of the students there are male, but a very small percentage of female students. So that's sad, and that doesn't bode well for the future, because if you know, school students are electing to study in a particular environment from a very early age, they're not, and most of the staff in the academies as well tend to be male. They haven't got this sort of female role model from an early age in schools. So it's almost like we've got a kind of contradiction, you know. In some ways, women are being encouraged and can be seen to be very, very positive role models. But on the other hand, if the academy or school system is streaming unintentionally, but reinforcing a lot of gender stereotypes, then that's a point for concern. So yeah, we have to encourage more female teachers, school teachers, to teach in science and engineering subjects as well, even if the students aren't initially 50-50 male and female.
Absolutely, and I could see Claire was really agreeing with you then. So I'm going to go to Claire to say, you know, on that issue of schools, what more can schools do to improve the number of young women who are studying subjects that can then set them up for a career in engineering?
Thank you. Yeah, I thought it was fascinating that as many of the speakers were talking, it came out in their stories that they'd been to an all-girls school, and I also went to an all-girls school, although I didn't mention it in my talk. And actually, that's really kind of shocking to me, that that's still a really important factor, in my opinion, in actually how all of us from different parts of the country, different backgrounds, but we all found a space, maybe as young women, in our environment, surrounded by other young women, and the impact that maybe that had on us from that very young age. So I think it's really fascinating that that still persists, and you know, the models of schooling in this country, across state and private sector, maybe don't lend themselves to thinking about those environments that we can make. And maybe it's not wholly segregated education, but maybe it's spaces where you know, we can hold space for young women to explore not just their career paths, but as we're talking about engineering, and actually explore that in an environment which feels safe and feels you know, limitless. And I think that's certainly something that we should probably think more about in terms of our schools. And then the other point I wanted to make on this is kind of taking it back to the point I made in my speech, which is it starts so young. And in fact, my experiences as a parent now have totally shocked me to my core at how incredibly obsessed our culture is right now in 2021. You know, and I've only been a parent for like 5 years, but with gender, obsessed. You can't have this toy, you must have that toy. You can't wear that thing because you appear to present as this gender. And I find it really depressing, because we have a whole generation of girls who are becoming more obsessed with being a princess, and less aware of, or less excited by the prospect of fixing problems, and you know, being brave and going out there and being the leader. And so I think you know, it does start in the home, and it starts really young, before school. Like the TV we let them look at, and the stories we kind of tell them. And yeah, we need to be telling our young women that they can do hard things. Engineering is hard, can be, but we can do hard things. You can do hard things, and it's something to embrace, not to shy away from.
So Claire, you've absolutely shown it's an issue for all of us, and it's sort of you know, is part of the fundamental way that we hold expectations for our boys, for our girls. So I'm going to ask Stephen this question, and it's this: what can we all do to promote women in engineering? So, you know, what's that bigger role for all of us to promote more women in engineering? You're still on mute, Steve.
I'm a man. Sorry. Yeah, thanks for the question, Deborah. What can we all do to promote more women into engineering? Well, I was just looking at some figures which were published by the International Renewable Energy Agency, and picked up also by Engineering UK. 18% of engineering and technology first degree undergraduates are female, only 18% according to this, but only 8% of apprenticeship starts in engineering and manufacturing technologies are female. So from the formal education side into industry, there's a big gap there. There's not enough women getting involved, firstly to take up the subjects of engineering technology. Why is that? And then when those that do achieve those degrees want to move into the working environment and industry, from the apprenticeship side, at least, it looks like they're not being given the opportunity. I think what's changing at the moment, we keep talking about, you know, we're in a big revolution, industrial revolution, green revolution, call it what you will. But lots of things are changing all at once. One of the things that isn't changing particularly well is the support for equality. And the support from men is just not there. That's a very broad brush statement. I understand that and appreciate that. But more and more women are supportive and supporting each other, in helping to empower other women. But what I'm noticing is that men are failing miserably in supporting that. So the support's got to come from every part of society. It's got to address the socioeconomic issues, the ethnicity issues, disability and gender. It's, you know, we're never going to get to this utopia that we all keep talking about as being, you know, we're going to get rid of fossil fuels, we're going to have a safer world to live in, a better world to live in. Maybe some of us will, but not everybody. And we have to take everybody with us. You know, we have to have equity as well as equality. We have to have opportunity for everybody. So I think men have a massive role to play in this, in the workplace, in the home, in the way they treat other people, in their attitudes. And, you know, I mean, I'm old and I've been listening to this conversation since the 70s when I was a teenager, and I've seen, you know, equal rights laws been brought into place, gender-based, disability-based, ethnic-based laws brought into place to try and find an equal space, but it's just never worked. So I think we all have a part to play, but I think industry and employers have a massive role to play in this, because, you know, we know that most boards of most companies are mostly dominated by white males. There's not enough women being given the opportunity to use their expertise, their experience, their qualifications, and there must be, because you know, my experience in the renewable energy industry is that women are better able to explain things to me. They're more patient when explaining things to me. They explain it in a much clearer, usable way, and they, you know, take time. Whereas men don't. They expect you to know it, and if you don't know it, forget it. You know, because I'm not going to teach you. And it's that sort of attitude, and it's more prevalent than it isn't with men. I mean, the Women Powering Smart Energy thing was a platform to give. So I was sick and tired of going to conferences and meetings where there were no women, or there was a token expert who happened to be female. So I started putting on conferences that were never going to be less than 50-50, but typically they are either all women speakers, and I can find so many, or, you know, 90% women speakers, and see how the men feel about that. Men don't even want to come to those events. You know, they just don't, and I don't know what I need to do to switch them. I have 500 followers of Women Powering Smart Energy on LinkedIn. I have 27 followers for Men Powering Smart Equality. They're just not interested. So what we all need to do is to have, there needs to be policy. There needs to be policy in business. There needs to be certain levels of government policy which can measure, and, you know, companies need to be accountable. Society needs to be accountable, because I think the only way we're going to drive true equality, whether it's gender, ethnicity, whatever it is to make people see the benefits of it. And every study that's done that I've read recently about diversity and inclusion in businesses, proves that, you know, the more women, the more diverse, the more equal your business runs, the better your profits are, the better the well-being factor is within the in the corporate structure, within the employees. Claire works for Octopus, and Susan works for Deloitte, and both of those companies are high up on doing the things that we've just spoken about as companies. And I think Octopus is a real trailblazer for equality, gender equality. And I think we need to see more of those companies like that. And as we make this transition to a green revolution, those old school companies and businesses are going to fall by the wayside if they don't start putting into place practices that we all want to and need to see to make the world a better place.
So thanks for that, Stephen. And I can see in the chat, you know, really something that has resonated with Linda saying that, you know, that in the past women in engineering were seen as a women's issue, and actually pointing to the fact that, and it's something that Narmeen said as well, is that actually, you know, engineering is gender neutral, and actually we should see this as an engineering issue. And so actually this was the question I was going to have for Susan, and I think I still want to explore it some more, which is that if we think about, you know, the benefits of promoting more women in engineering, it would be tempting to think about it in terms of the benefits for the women themselves. You know, it's great. Suddenly, you know, a young woman has got more career options, or suddenly a young woman can really explore the things that they're passionate about. However, are there other benefits? Are there wider benefits to engineering, or to the way that engineering can solve the world's problems? So what do you see as the importance of this agenda? So this is for Susan.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, when we look at the role of engineering, and I think if I think of the Royal Academy of Engineering and our late patron, engineers are doctors to the world. You know, we provide critical problem solving, and we take a systems approach. And I certainly, from my own personal experience, have learned that over the last 16 to 18 months. So as I said, I'm an electrical mechanical engineer, and I focus in the energy sector, but I had a call to action back on the 18th of March of how my engineering skills could help support the government's response to COVID. And my focus has been around how do we ensure that the products are accessible to all parts of society. And I think, you know, we each probably have stories like that over the last 16 to 18 months, but certainly for me, that shows the applicability of that mindset that we have as engineers. And I think when we talk about passion and how we attract people into engineering, I didn't mention, but all my siblings are in engineering. So I'm an identical twin sister. My sister is in the energy industry. She works for UK Power Networks. And my younger brother is an engineer working for Scottish Power. So we joke that we could be Mcdonald Energy at some point. But you know, when I look at the work that my sister and my brother do and the opportunities, I think it's important that we encourage all students to think about engineering, but I think we have to recognize the numbers are not there yet for women. And so I think the importance that we've been discussing is role models. And I have to say, when I look at my early career at National Grid, I was supported by fantastic male managers and role models that allowed me to have a platform to not only be myself, but to also learn quick and grow. But I do remember the distinct difference when I was working really closely with some fantastic, inspiring female role models. So one of them was Corey O'Hara, and it just gave a different perspective. And so it doesn't take away the value and the inspiration I got from my male mentors and coaches. But as you grow into your career, there's different complexities that it's helpful to have that perspective. And also know that you can be, be yourself, and that there's someone that is a female sponsor. So when we look at how do we inspire more people into engineering, I think sometimes it's complex to navigate, because engineering can mean so many different careers and roles. And I think describing as that golden ticket helps. But I think helping to boil down, well, what does that mean? And I think it is hard when you're a student to try and navigate that engineering is needed for product design. So everyone has a mobile device, an engineer has touched that. When we are traveling to school, whether that be in a train or a car, an engineer has been involved. And I think it's the role model stories and the impact that engineers have. And the more we can get that into mainstream TV, media, into the curriculums, I just think it's almost no one's going to say no when you can describe the type of careers that you've heard from today, but also the untold stories that are out there around the impacts that we can have.
And that's a really good observation, and that leads me really well into what I was going to ask Ruth, because Ruth, you've done that really important work in uncovering those particularly those untold stories of women engineers in the past. How do we get that better known? How do we get that better known so that it's not something that we look at once a year and go, oh, wow, did you know? How do we get that embedded more in terms of general understanding about the role of women in engineering? So Ruth.
I think one of the things is to keep talking about it and pointing out who some of these people are. I mean, I'm very much not an engineer, just my background is history, but I still find it really fascinating to hear about engineers' research and to see the kind of wealth of things that people are working on, and seeing people who are my contemporaries, who are younger, who are older, who've had really fascinating careers. It's always interesting. I've found looking at these profiles absolutely fascinating, because some of the issues that the women I wrote up or that I had the opportunity to speak to, they're universal issues. Somebody mentioned men who assume that you're the secretary, or they look at your male colleague for validation. That happens in every sector. It's still very annoying wherever you are. But I think in recognizing that there are universal issues, but seeing that actually people are overcoming them and looking at who some of these people are and what they've done. I find the role modeling particularly interesting, because more than one person I've spoken to, and Linda, who's commented in the chat, have mentioned Agnes Kaposi as being really inspiring for them. For the reason they came to work at Lsbu, who was an inspiring head of department and supportive head of department while they were there and while she was there. And just thinking about the wealth of work that she's done, and even from the conversation that I had with her to draft up a profile on the website, I found her absolutely inspiring. And I think the more that we talk to people about what they've done and talk about what they've overcome and look at their stories, not just one day of the year, but all year round, I think is really helpful for thinking about that and for those issues.
And Ruth, in that wealth of stories that you uncovered, was there one thing that really surprised you? What was the one thing that you look back now and you think, wow, I couldn't believe it when I discovered this?
I'm not sure there was one kind of really astounding fact, but I did feel very proud of Lsbu for the work that we've done over the last 100 years, and seeing kind of the uptake of these courses and encouraging women into this, thinking that we've been doing that for 100 years, including at times when it wasn't really common for people to do that. So that wasn't really a surprise, because I think we've been doing impressive work for a long time, but it was definitely a really encouraging thing. It was slightly surprising to see the same issues come up again and again and to recognise them, but in some ways it probably should have been because those are universal things. But yeah.
And I think that's been the really interesting point in our conversation, of the similarities, perhaps sometimes of stories from people that have entered engineering more recently with stories of people who entered engineering perhaps a longer period in the past. Now I'm going to come back to this. You know, we talked about the importance of this of the wider post-university context. So this isn't a challenge that ends when someone graduates with a fabulous degree. Stephen talked about the importance of employer-sponsored continuing professional engagement, and the need for a policy in this area. So actually, I'm going to go to Claire and say, how can we get a kind of wider commitment by the engineering sector, the big employers, more generally, to ensure that there's equality for everyone who's entering the engineering workforce? Claire.
Wow, I mean, it's a very big, it's a big question and a big challenge, but I think there's some really simple things that we can do. And thanks to Steve for a nod to Octopus, because what we are doing, particularly with regards to who we recruit and how we recruit, maybe there's some clues there, and really starting with casting the net very wide, I think, is important. So trying to break down some of these unconscious biases around what does an engineer look like, and that might be physical, or that might be what some of their physical characteristics, but things about their education, their experiences to date, their backgrounds. Also being a little bit more careful about how we handle their data coming in. So I think innovation in recruiting might not sound like it's related to engineering, but actually thinking about blind screening of CVs, thinking about simple stuff, taking names off, taking demographic information off, and actually looking at, first of all, okay, what are we looking for in this role? What are the absolute must-have basics in terms of qualifications and things? There's no reason why you need to know someone's name or even see a picture. We should be absolutely, we should be moving away from that as fast as we possibly can, which we know from studies will lead to a more diverse pool from which to then start to interview from. And I think also, flexibility. And these things don't specifically apply to women, but they will help around women who we know have still have higher caring commitments, of maybe family members, maybe of children. And if we do want to start families, then there is a period in your career where you may wish to choose to take a break, and that's very important for society. And I think there is still a stigma, whether we want to address it directly or indirectly, around a weakness in being a woman because you are going to go through a process of having a child. And that's a whole other topic, maybe for another day. But where it leads us to in engineering is that we have people who may be put off for longer and longer starting their families, maybe compromise on that whole part of their life in order to maintain their position or try to continue on a career path. And actually accepting that that experience can enhance your abilities as an engineer. It's certainly enhanced my ability to multitask and to think through on my feet, very, problem solve in the heat of the moment. There's an awful lot that we can gain through these experiences, not just women, because, we do need, we do share, and certainly in my family, we share that equally now, and of course we should be doing that. So there's an awful lot around the recruitment process, and what does true flexibility in the workplace really mean, and around celebrating and making the most of those life experiences that people will have, rather than seeing it as to the detriment of their career, and allowing people to to not return to the workplace, which honestly is just the most sort of sad and depressing thing, because you absolutely have just as much, if not more, to bring. So I would love to see more companies actually being innovative with recruitment and retention.
So thanks for that, and thanks for situating the issue as part of that broader issue of how do we ensure that we're making the best of all our talent. Actually, and so I'm going to ask a similar question to Narmeen, in the work that you've been doing in terms of your support for women in science and engineering, you know, what do you think are the biggest challenges for women to, you know, who have entered the workforce, who are, you know, then trying to progress as an engineer, and what do you think are the most important opportunities in terms of opening up those avenues for women engineers? So Narmeen.
Thank you. I think there are a few things, and from my experience is that the engineering, the big companies, they're still very traditional, and they value people who kind of stay in the same job and produce and progress in a more linear, other technical way. And from my experiences and speaking to my networks, you know, women often have additional skills that they can bring, like building relationships and kind of this kind of softer skills it may seem. And these are not necessarily valued as much as kind of like the hard technical skills. And that, I think, can be a barrier to women within the industry and sector kind of progressing forward. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed and equalized in terms of values of skills. And I think also one of the things, and certainly something that I've done, is, you know, as an engineer and naturally curious person, I value variety of experiences and broadening out. And so I've switched around, still within, you know, engineering, but done quite very different things, from, you know, high temperature materials to kind of nuclear fuel route, and then corporate strategy, electricity markets. So kind of very various things. And sometimes it's seen as kind of resetting the skills rather than a holistic view. So I think that's something that, you know, speaking to other engineers as well, they also value moving up, but they feel like that could be a barrier. And then coming back to kind of Claire's point about flexibility, I think that's something that organizations should definitely push, but equally for men as well. We need men to take up these flexible working practices to kind of normalize it, so it's not seen as something only women do or mothers do or carers do. It's fine for everyone to, you know, work how they want to have some sort of work-life balance. And certainly I saw within EDF, when they introduced flexible working policy years ago, it was really good to see a man, you know, say, I want to do a 4-day week because that gives me better work-life balance to spend with my kids. So those kind of things really helped.
So
yeah.
So that's something that would benefit both men and women within the sector generally, that flexibility. And I was really struck by what you talked about in terms of how you've changed your field within engineering. And Susan, you have a similar story in terms of that change of specialization. And I was thinking about, you know, when you did your presentation with the 4 C's, that curiosity, and again, that's really resonated with something that Narmeen's just has just said. Do you think that women engineers are more likely to cross those sort of engineering boundaries? Do you think that's more likely? And is there anything we can do to kind of support that kind of movement?
I think it's a good question. When I look back at changing my career from industry and consulting, you know, there was a recognition that, you know, unfortunately in the power sector there's very few engineers, and I've got some wonderful mentors and external coaches that I only had one that asked the question of, well, you're no longer going to be an engineer. And actually there is some perception that my educational training and my application is engineering, but going from a industry into consulting, I am still, you know, I work with asset intensive engineering companies, but I am consulting into them. So I do think there is some perceptions. I think some of the points that the rest of the panel made is, because you're able to articulate something more simply doesn't mean you understand the detail. What it means is you're able to ensure that you can communicate a vision, which I think is so important. So you recognizing who your audience is. And I think that's a skill set that both men and women have, but we do have that tendency as female engineers to bring to bear. And I think making sure that you see that from our institutions and our academies, really ensuring that people understand, how do you speak to policy? Engineers have to influence policy if we want to shape that sustainable future we want to see. How do we actually ensure that all customers and stakeholders and communities know how things that are changing around them are going to benefit or impact them? So when I think about energy, making sure that people understand when projects are going on, that to be an engineer, you have to have the financial acumen, the ability to communicate. And I think we're seeing that in our institutions and our academies. And I think from an organization perspective, when I look at both when I was at National Grid and as I'm at Deloitte, stakeholder management and communication is so critical that we have to ensure that it's a core part of our careers and it's valued in terms of people's performance and their development. I think that when we look at different stages of careers, I think we have to acknowledge that it's very rare now to start to see someone be in the same organization for a long amount of time, and it's about what was the key learning and what have they gained from it. And so I absolutely, from my time in industry, can credibly talk to my clients that I've done that practical change. I understand I have the practical experience of delivering a project and the complexities, both from an engineering and stakeholder perspective. And when we look at the people's changes in careers, it's around what have they gained and learned, and making sure that that's part of their manual. We talk about in Deloitte, the manual of me. Everyone has experience, not only from work, but experience outside of work that lends itself to us to be human, to bring that authenticity to our work. And I think the more we talk about that manual of me and everything that we bring into work and those experiences, and the more it's recognized, I think that's when those barriers start coming down. And what I find really useful is when you do have that mindset shift, you have the ability to learn so much more from the people around you and recognize that there's a lot of things that I learn as an engineer from someone that works purely as a civil servant, or someone who is focused on campaigning for fuel poverty. And I think when you recognize those skills, I think it allows you to learn more as well.
So I love the idea of the manual of me. I think that kind of reflection is really important. So in the last 5 minutes, I think we've sort of talked about the challenge for individual engineers. And then we've gone to the wider challenges within society. I'd like to end with the challenges to universities. I'm going to pose a question to Deborah and then to Sana, and it really is, how can universities be more active in supporting female engineers? What can we do that's even better, and particularly in that journey all the way through into really successful careers? So I'll go to Deborah first.
I think something like I don't want to say buddy because that's a very male term, but a budette or whatever, maybe somebody when students are at university, somehow to link in some way with professional women in engineering and associated fields would be really helpful. And I don't know very much about the Wise and Women in Engineering organizations. So I don't know whether they offer that, but I think that would be helpful. And in terms of universities, events like this are fantastic, but can we extend them and encourage more alumni and so forth to come and share the good experiences, not necessarily the bad ones, you know, but share the good experiences with students who are just developing their careers. I think it's slightly more tricky with the, you know, the feeder institutions, the schools and so forth, academies, but any opportunity to present young male students, you know, to introduce them to working with female lecturers and academics, researchers can be very positive as well. Because I think there's, you know, perhaps there are suppositions, depending on their home background, perhaps there are suppositions and cultural issues around, you know, expectations of what women do and don't do, etc. Yeah, more female lecturers would be good, more female researchers in the university, and some kind of professional links with women working in industry, who are no doubt, I mean, I don't know, Susan and Claire and I can't see Nareem yet. Yeah, I know you're probably invited to lots of events to share your experiences, and I can assure you that they're really valued. But, you know, if you can encourage your female peers to do the same, then that would be wonderful.
So more sharing of experiences and more events like this. So I'll go to Savannah, and I think yours will be the last word on this. But what can universities do more of? What can we do better?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything Deborah says, but definitely for me, I think it's having more female role models. So, you know, not just having a department that's mainly filled with men, but encouraging more women to take up more academic posts. And I know LSBU is great with inviting speakers. I know we had a lot of speakers during my time as an undergraduate. So maybe I think if we can keep this Women in Engineering event going and invite more speakers, because we have lots of talented women here today and many, many more that we do have. So definitely, I think if we can have regular talks by them, then I know the few women that will be doing the degree will definitely get inspired and, you know, pursue their degree even further to take up a, you know, leadership position in industry or in academia maybe. So yeah.
So absolutely, and I think I'm going to end this session by thanking all of the panelists, and by repeating the comment in the chat from Fang Lu, who says, "Great session, very inspiring. Appreciate your talks and efforts." Absolutely, more events like this. More of that reference to those role models, you know, more female role models, both within the university and more widely, is, you know, really crucial. But also those links to women engineers who are actually out there and who can talk about their experiences. Absolutely crucial. So I want to thank everybody on this panel. Thank you so much, and thank you for bearing with my questions. I'm now going to hand over to Dean. Dean.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you very much for everyone for your presentations and your contributions on the panel today. It's been absolutely eye-opening for me. And what I wanted to basically do before we close today is pretty much just round up the LSBU 100 Women Engineering event series, because this is in fact our 10th and final within this event series. We will be doing more events within Women in Engineering, but for this event series, this is finished. But I wanted to take this time to basically give some thank yous, because an event series with 10 events, it's not just one person that creates the events and contributes. There's a number of people that have been absolutely amazing during this time. So I just wanted to take this time to go through the list that we have. So I'm not going to go through every name, so I'm just going to pick a few names out in terms of each slide. So first of all, I just want to say thank you, Professor Deborah Johnson, for being the host for the panel discussion, and as well as being the host for our first event, which is a complete full circle for this event series. So thank you very much. And also on this page, I want to say thank you to Linda Edwards-Shea, who who was part of our first event in our launch event, as well as our centenary event in April. I believe is in the chat, so thank you very much for your contributions. In our next page, I wanted to say a big thank you to Dr. Sophia Bazari, who pretty much helped us regarding our outreach-led events for this year as part of the LSBU 100 Women Event Series, as well as Rachel Donker, a part of our outreach team. So behind the scenes, we've been trying to get as many young people involved with our events and getting their input within our events. And both Safia and Rachel have been leads in those contributions. Next, I want to say massive thank you as well to Professor Katrina Beaumont, who was the curator of our April event, our centenary of education events, and she, from her planning, for her promotion, as well as creating a very in-depth program for that event, was truly inspiring. And thank you very much, Katrina Beaumont. And then last but not least, just want to thank everyone here today. So Sandra for the opening address, Dr. Caposi, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, but sent through her presentation early. I did the presentation with her yesterday. Claire, Steve, Narmeen, Susan, Sana, Deborah and Bridget, who had to leave earlier just before we finished today, but thank you all for your efforts. Want to say a big thank you to Ruth, who has been absolutely instrumental for the Women LSBU 100 Women Engineering Event Series. Not only has Ruth been a speaker as part of 3 of our events, but she's also created our profiles, 1 a month, and has been absolutely tremendous in terms of getting the history as well as doing the research before we created the event series to ensure that we had all the right information going forward. The LSBU content team for providing to basically editing the videos, creating all the designs, as well as the press for the event series, the School of Engineering for all the support, as well as Suela and Sandra, who pretty much being like my rocks in terms of trying to create this event series. And last but not least, we wouldn't be here if it weren't for Dr. Claire Benson, who was the original, who created this event series back in 2019, did all the early plan before COVID hit, and then we had to rejig how we were going to create the event series and create it virtually. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Dr. Claire Benson, and I hope she's all well in New Zealand. So that's it from me. So thank you all. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
It's imaginative, it's challenging, and it's rewarding.
Creative, exciting, world-changing.
Innovation, impact, and solutions.
It's diverse, it's life-changing, it's transformational.
On a daily basis, I do lots of different things.
I perform data analysis and subsurface modelling,
focusing on data analytics and cognitive computing.
I'm involved in research and enterprise projects about sustainability.
I make materials that provide solutions to global challenges.
I get to use my theoretical knowledge in practical environments and find out how engineers can change the world for the better.
I love engineering because it's challenging. It can really help to solve problems at all sorts of levels.
I love engineering because it helps me express my creativity and you get to break the barriers.
It gives me freedom to deliver positive changes for a better world.
I would tell the next generation of female engineers that if you're a lady who wants to make a change in the world, then this is the career for you.
We need you. If you want to feel empowered, then engineering is for you. Join the top table.
I am a design engineer.
I am a computer scientist.
I am a petroleum engineer.
I am a materials engineer.
I am a chemical engineering student at London South Bank University.